Books are uniquely portable magic. This is AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks, and I'm your host, Ramya Amadin. Thanks for listening, specifically to that quote by Stephen King. Now, I've been doing really, really well and not mentioning Stephen King every day, every week, every episode for the last 3 episodes or so, but I've been definitely going through a Stephen King binge with these books. I started off with On Writing, a memoir of the craft, which is where this quote lies, by the way. And then I just kept going because absolutely inspirational piece of writing here inspired me to read and listen to books, take in books in a totally different way than I've been doing thus far. Being more present, if you will. But anyway, Stephen King says a lot about writing in this memoir, but much more, I feel, impacted me about the reading aspect of it. Hence, the magic part of the quote. He's very eloquent at describing a lot of things and describing how he, as the writer, wants to make us feel as the reader is probably one of the more brilliant parts of the writing in this book. A little indulgent at points, but still very, very fun. I loved the book. Now, let's move on to the CELA homepage. The Center for Equitable Library Access at celalibrary.ca is where you can go for these 3 featured titles right at the top of the homepage. Asphalt Prophecy by Pira Seyus Lore, Adventure Stories, and the second one is The Queer Evangelist by Sherry DeNovo. This is an LGBTQ plus biography. And the third and final featured title up there so far is Twice a Quinceañera by Damal Said Mendez. This is a contemporary romance. We're going to stick with CELA for the next little bit as well, because on the blog, which is very easy to find up on the site, they titled this post Books About the Power of Books, published on September 8th, 2022 by Karen McKay. And it's a very significant day this year. I'll tell you why in a second. They say they've gathered books about books and book lovers in honor of International Literacy Day, which was September 8th, 2022. So books have an incredible capacity to educate, entertain, and connect us, which is why it's crucial for everyone, including those with print disabilities, have access to reading materials and the skills and tools to read them. Here are 3 highlights that I personally picked from this list, but the list goes on, and the reasons and highlights for these books that have been chosen in this blog post I think are fabulous and wonderful by our friends from CELA. So please continue on after listening to this episode to check out the remaining books, because if you like these, you will like the other ones. They're amazing. So the 3 highlights. The first one is The Reading List, a novel by Sarah Nisha Adams. I'll tell you a little about each of these picks. This one's about how a chance encounter with a list of library books helps forge an unlikely friendship between 2 very different people living in a London suburb. So one of these characters is Elijah. Elijah is a bright but anxious teenager working at the local library for the summer when she discovers a crumpled up piece of paper in the back of To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a list of novels that she's never heard before, but intrigued, she impulsively decides to pick and read every book on this list one after another. As each story gives up its magic, they transport Alasia from the painful realities that she's facing at home. This is really good. The next one, Writing Alida in Quran by Azar Nafisi. This takes place in Iran in the late 90s. Asar Nafisi and 7 young women, her former students, gather at her house every Thursday to discuss forbidden works of literature. Shy and uncomfortable at first, they soon begin to open up, not only about the novels they were reading, but also about their own dreams and disappointments. their personal stories intertwine with the ones they're reading about, which makes this a fabulous book for you to check out. The last one is called I'd Rather Be Reading: The Delights and Dilemmas of the Reading Life by Anne Bourgel. For so many people, reading isn't just a hobby or a way to pass the time, it's a lifestyle. So you can learn more about how all these people in these short journalistic reviews describe that lifestyle when you check it out. On today's episode, we're going to be checking in with Aamer Khan. He's got a fun theme for us today on AMI Audiobook Review. This is AMI Audiobook Review, and it's time to get into audiobooks with Aamer Khan. Aamer is back, of course, near the end of the month. We check in with him on his reading list and how that's progressing, but also we have a theme of the day. Sometimes it takes two, but not so fast. We'll get into it shortly on the theme, but Aamer, what are you reading right now?
So, sort of dovetailing off my last month's books of true crime, I somehow ended up reading some fiction crime books, which is not entirely surprising since that's a genre I really like to read in terms of suspense and whodunits and these pieces. But two very, very different books I came across. One I have mentioned before, the movie LA Confidential, which was based on a book by James Ellroy. I tried to listen to this book from Sila, but the recording was fairly old and not doing too well. But they fixed it up, and I found it on
Hmm.
my bookshelf, so I gave it a shot. And it is a very, very dark, gritty um, police drama type of book. There's a lot of sort of surprises and lots of lying and all sorts of other things, but it's definitely not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of slang which wouldn't be acceptable in today's sort of world. The book is set in the late 1940s and was written in the late 1980s, I believe. It's also not for the
Okay.
faint-hearted because there's tons of gore and and this type of stuff. For one of the previous books I reviewed, The Poet by Michael Connolly, I described it as being sort of black and white. And when you're reading it, you get that sort of feeling. This book is sort of like that, but double or triple times the effect. Um, yeah,
Hmm. So it must have been a difficult one for you because you're not always keen to pick up a book if you already know ahead of time how
yeah. In
gruesome
general,
it's
it's
going to
hard for
be.
me to get through a book if I'm not enjoying it. I mean, for the most part, I pick up
Right.
books because I want to enjoy the read and enjoy the ride and enjoy the story. This one was more of, oh no, our central character is doing this, that, the other thing, and sort of falling off the wagon constantly in terms of his life, and you're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You have everything, and you're seeing
Hmm.
these sort of things keep happening, and so it wasn't easy. It is intriguing if you are a fan of the dark and sort of detective, sort of anti-hero sort of genre. I think you'd enjoy this book, um, but definitely not a feel good type of read.
No.
Um,
No. And you kept going with fiction crime. Was the next
yeah,
one? I'm assuming this one wasn't feel
this
good
one is
either.
actually better. This one
Okay.
was recommended by Sarah Patel, who you've had on the show before, an author by the name of Karen Wolfe, and she has an interesting style in terms of the way she's actually gone about writing her books in general. So all her books are numbered, sort of like one through, I think she's at 20 or something now. But she has a style where she introduces certain characters in a book in a certain location. So I started with number 12, which is the beginning of the Baltimore series, I believe. And the central character is a medical examiner who's female, and these somebody keeps murdering people and leaving the body for her to find. And there's some tiebacks to her hometown where she's not currently living, and she has to sort of piece it together. And it's a really interesting read. Again, not for the faint of heart, but this is more of a feel good and more realistic and more in color type of read, as I would put it. Um, and the interesting part of the generality of the way she writes is that the next book, which I've already started, It also takes place in Baltimore, but sort of shifts the central character to somebody else, but somebody who was introduced in the
Mhm.
previous book. So it's almost like a handoff or a relay race into the next book. And a lot of romance authors will do that, where there's a group of four friends, and the first book starts with one friend and sort of goes down the line. This one is less obvious in terms of that sort of in that sort of way, but you do get it. It's a nice comfort factor, especially if you're looking for a series, but you're not sure you want to get into it in the middle and worried about things that happened before or not. Each book is sort of standalone, but you get just enough of an introduction of some of the characters so you can go on and then read more.
Right, the link is there. Now, you said it's not always obvious that the link is there, so are you left kind of wondering, by the end of, the book, if this is gonna be the plot character development for the
Well, I
next one?
think you're more looking at it from when you pick up the next book. You're wondering where the people from the previous book might
The first
might
one left
might fit
off.
into it,
Yeah.
because it's such a big shift in terms of the central characters won't be the same. There's no expectation of of them sort of driving the bus, but you're sort of just looking out to see where they fit in and that kind of thing while the action starts. And Karen Wolf is great at sort of starting the book off with tons of action. So you're sort of she's sort of got you right away. So they're not
Mm,
short books. The Karen Wolf
okay.
books are in the 18-hour, I believe, range. Um, so if you're looking to curl up with a good mystery or whodunit, it's a good one to pick up.
For a couple weeks in
Hmm.
a row. That sounds amazing, yeah. I know, Sarah's a huge fan of these series, so that's definitely a good highlight. Now, Amr, sometimes it takes 2. This is the theme for today, so what do you mean by this?
So this came about because I started reading books by author by the name of L.T. Ryan, and he's got two series on the Sela in the Sela collection. One series is about sort of a CIA operative, and the other one is about a woman who sees dead people but doesn't know really what it means, but ends up helping police solve crimes. So they're two very different series, and what I noticed was that um, the co-author for both these series is different. So it looks like this author is teaming up with different other authors to make his series, and it got me thinking about books which are written by more than one author and what they might look like and what they might entail. So I started to go down that route of that particular avenue of taking a look at what collaboration might look like for books. And before I get into the books, there is actually an event that has authors collaborating tomorrow,
Mm,
Sunday, September 25th, at the Evergreen Brickworks here in Toronto as part of the Toronto Book Awards. So it's an interesting event. I mean, we usually don't interact with authors all that much outside of book launches and um, those sort of events. And I found this event a little
right.
bit unique where they're doing it at the Evergreen Brickworks, which is more of a park atmosphere. And you have authors who will be doing nature walks and reading from some of their pieces at the same time. And, the morning is dedicated to kids and that type of thing. So, um,
A walk and read? I love
yeah, it's
that.
a very unique sort of look. I know last week you were talking to Peter about book clubs, and that's another sort of interaction you can have with books. And sometimes authors get involved with those book clubs as well. But I found this interesting where this is much more sort of nature focused in terms of come out to this natural space. We'll walk you around, and you can talk to the authors. There's also a component that's called soapbox science, where some recent PhD graduates will be talking about their thesis and doctoral pieces on environmental and naturalistic related subjects. So,
It's amazing. Thank you for highlighting that. I mean, Evergreen Brickworks is a beautiful place to go anyway in Toronto. Farmers markets and food are a couple of reasons why I've been there. But this is a really lovely place. When we say when we name our favorite places to read and relax with a book, I automatically think of outdoor spaces. So I think it's wonderful that they've highlighted that and the authors who will show up for it.
yeah, it gets me curious about other events that maybe, that they'll have something at Halloween in the dark or something to really scare the pants off of you or something. But,
Yeah. Oh my god, Fear Fest. You run away from the zombies at Wonderland with your
and I
book.
think this is a great segue into talking about another really unique sort of co authored piece I came across. last month. Unfortunately, it wasn't human narrated last month, but it is now. So that's the good news. And this piece of
Mhm.
work is called No Rest for the Dead. And the reason why I describe it as a piece of work rather than a novel is because there are over 20 authors that authored this book. And there's sort of the who's who of American literature, including R.L. Stine and quite a few others in the suspense genre. And this is an interesting piece because they've written it like a relay race. So one author actually wrote each chapter, and after each chapter, the next author took up the thread of the chapter and kept going and writing the book. So
Wow.
I'm really looking forward to reading it. I've given it as a choice for Amer's Evening Book Club to the group for next month. We'll see if that happens or not. But like, I found it really interesting that all these authors decide to collaborate on a book like this, and really curious to see what there is on.
Some big
Yeah,
names
yeah,
too.
definitely.
That's it's very playful, right? Like, it reminds me of kind of an icebreaker idea, but legit.
Exactly.
Like, put it down on paper, we're
It's
publishing it.
like it's almost like an improv, right? You go, you do this, you
Yes.
do that, but it's on paper, so yeah, I'd imagine it'd be a lot more challenging.
Mhm. And how many times do you wanna go back and, I would love to hear the tendencies of the authors who went through this. How many times do you wanna go back and, change up what the previous person wrote to kind of set the
Exactly.
tone for your chapter?
And how you keep cohesion, right? I mean, every
Yes.
author has their little bit of style and sort of what they're known for and where they go in terms of their storyline. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
fun. That's very fun.
but
Did
there's
you mention, the genre, the tone of this?
I believe it's a suspense.
Okay.
So it starts with I think the some people finding a dead body and not knowing what to do about it. And I don't think it's supposed to be very gory. I think that's just like sort of the background premise of the play of the piece. But yeah, I'll have to read it to find out more.
Well, it leaves a lot of room for exploration, suspense in general, so,
Definitely.
yeah.
And there are certainly authors who are famous for collaborating. One of your favorite authors, Stephen King, has collaborated with a
Woohoo.
countless number of authors,
Mhm.
um, and others are out there. But I took a couple of random lists on Google and the internet in terms of to see which books sort of pop up more than others. One of them that I came across was actually recommended by Debbie Williams, who's another contributor on the program, um, and the title is called Inheritance, and the author is pen named Judith Michaels. And even the name is interesting because this is written by a husband and wife team, um, with obviously the female portion being Judith and the male portion being Michael. And they write together. This piece is definitely not for somebody who's looking for a short read. I think it's about 28 hours long. It's what I would call an epic type of read. But it's a classic story done in a very nice way in terms of a storyline. Starts with sort of somebody who's poor and young and looking to rob some rich people by being employed by them, and doesn't have the heart to do it anymore because the family takes her in, and everything sort of starts from there, and it goes through many years. But you go from New York to Chicago to a couple of other places. I like to use the R words in here: romance, redemption, revenge. I mean, it's all sort of baked into this very long book. But especially with winter coming up, this might be a good read for by the fireplace.
Now you've read this or started reading it?
I'm
You're
done.
done. Oh, okay, great.
Hmm.
So, would you knowing that it was a husband-wife team, knowing that it was kind of a collaborative author, experience, did you look for that in the writing? I don't know what you would exactly look for because it's, all edited and polished, but, um, were there hints that the authors put out there? This is maybe more of an inside question for the authors, but I'm definitely curious about that kind of thing. Where do we notice her style and his, and, what elements were more his than hers, etcetera?
Yeah, two parts I had in the back of my mind when I was reading this was one, if I could pick out which part would be male and which part would be
Okay,
female,
yep,
sort of along classic lines. And then the second piece was whether I could spot a difference in terms of styles in general.
mhm.
And I honestly couldn't do that. It was a very well put together
They did
piece
it so
where
well.
if I yeah, if I didn't know that it was a husband and wife theme, I wouldn't be able to tell. And I came across other authors who where they do the same thing, where a husband and wife would alternate the chapters. So it's not a new concept. That it has been done. It was new to me in terms of being aware of it and reading it. But there are several books and several collaborators. I even came across one book which was written by ex-husband and wife,
Mm.
which I thought was interesting.
They
Um,
just didn't want to let go of their
yeah,
professional endeavors.
either that or it's maybe the only thing they had left in common,
Oh
right?
no.
So,
Let's write their stories. Right, exactly. But it is interesting. I also thought of, we got one more example that you wanted to give, but I also thought of when this theme came up for us today, the aspect of one author finishing a book and then another author feeling like they need to pick up the story. And I'm thinking of Gone with the Wind, right? And then the second book, Scarlet, which was written by a completely different person. And in that book, or in those two books, I was doing the same thing. I'm like, oh, let's nitpick the heck out of this one and see if we can figure out how different the books are from each other. But honestly, it was so hard to do because I found it to be phenomenal as a continuation from Gone with the Wind.
yeah, it's amazing how seamless some authors can be, even though they might be different people. Tom Clancy's another example of that, where he passed away and people still took up his sort of style and,
Right.
and the series that he wrote. And it's very difficult to tell style wise, at least for me and for most people, I think, the difference between him and others. And I think that's a great, mark to the people who took up that particular
Yes.
project, that it's so well done. Um, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting concept where you have people who are writing in the style of somebody else, or trying to emulate them in terms of those pieces. Action is always an interesting one to me because it seems so formulaic.
Mm-hmm.
And every time there's a new action hero that's put to paper, you have influences which are out there, just like you have for all sorts of action movies. But it's interesting to see how people take it in a different direction.
And do it so well. Absolutely. Okay, you want
Mhm.
to hit one more before we let you go?
I do. I saved the most unique for
Okay.
last. It has the most unique title as well. It's a long one, so bear with me. It's called Good Omens: The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter Witch. And this is done by a collaboration of two very well-known fantasy writers, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I hope I'm pronouncing those names right.
Neil Gaiman, yep.
Um, and again, from a seamless perspective, I really can't tell the difference between whether this was done by two people or one. The book sort of looks at four different storylines which are going on at the same time. It's one central storyline, but there's sort of four groups of characters which are following throughout this piece. And the genre is a bit different, so if you're not into fantasy, this might not be for you. But it is very much a religious fantasy satire. The central characters in the book are a demon and an angel who are trying to put the brakes on the end of the world in a very funny and hilarious way. The book is sarcastic. It's very non-serious. If you're a fan of Netflix shows like The Adventures of Sabrina
Oh
or
yeah.
Lucifer, this is sort of along the same lines. Um, the book can get a bit long in the tooth towards the middle, but I'll be honest. The narration by Jonathan Oliver. There's one of the main characters is named Demon Crawley, and I think for the entire time I was reading the book, I was just waiting for him to say anything because he does it
So
so
good.
well. Yeah.
As always, shout out to our narrators. Amr, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun and just an interesting thing to look at, collaboration of writing, whether it's meant to be, distinct and different between authors or where you're all pooling in your expertise to get one thing out. Appreciate it.
Hey, sometimes it just takes two.
Exactly. Or 3 or 20 in some of the examples. Aamer Khan joining us just before the last week, the last Tuesday of the month to be specific. And he joins us with his trends recommendations and all kinds of amazing audiobook news. That's it for today's episode of AMI Audiobook Review. And until next week's brand new fresh episode, happy audiobook listening.
AMI's Described Video Guide lists television programming available for viewers who are blind or partially sighted. From dramas to sitcoms, documentaries to movies, children's programming to animated series, AMI's Described Video Guide has it all. For a comprehensive list of described television programming in Canada, visit ami.ca/dvguide or call toll-free 1-855-855-1144. I'm Greg David, Communication Specialist at AMI.